So Invincible is huge right now. Season 4 just wrapped up, we've got a new fighting game that looks sick, and in just a few short years, these characters have skyrocketed into becoming household names. But as most of us, unfortunately, probably know all too well, when something blows up in popularity like this, people tend to get really weird about it. I put out a post on my community tab as well as my members-only Discord server for all your weirdest and most controversial opinions all about our favorite title card. Now, some of you might be asking, didn't you just make a video on Invincible last week? Why are you doing 2 of them back to back? Well, there's actually a pretty good explanation for that, and it's because I'm Just to put your mind at ease a little bit, I have read the comic, but I'm not going to be spoiling anything after what happens in season 4. So if you're just a show watcher, you are perfectly welcome here. Do not worry. Robert Kirkman should have never debunked the adrenaline theory. So the adrenaline theory, it's basically this idea that because Mark is half human, half Viltrumite, Viltrumites can't produce adrenaline like humans can, and so Mark is able to get kind of a leg up in fights when he gets like extra angry or extra scared. It's an idea that on paper, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting idea. I don't hate that. And then I thought about it for 5 seconds and I realized, wait, that's a terrible idea. What the? Because not only are Viltrumites considered like the best fighters in the entire universe, why wouldn't they create adrenaline in their bodies? But also a lot of people tend to forget how Viltrumite DNA like actually works. They explain this in the show, but even though technically Mark is like half human, half Viltrumite, the Viltrumite DNA is so powerful that it overpowers the human side to the point where by the time he gets his powers, Mark is literally like 99.99 with the line over it percent Viltrumite. And I'm frankly glad that Robert Kirkman has like kind of come forward and debunked that idea, you know, like, well, technically on paper it makes sense. I think it kind of ignores the major themes of Invincible and of this story, because I think the main message and the main idea of Invincible is not necessarily that Mark himself is like the most powerful or the physically strongest person in the universe. Of course he's not. He gets his ass beat all the fucking time. But it's that his spirit and his will is invincible, that he is unbreakable, and he has a better reason to fight for what he's fighting for because he loves his family, because he loves his planet, and he has these people that he cares about. And I think that's kind of why I don't really delve into power scaling conversations too much, because I think you lose a lot of the heart and the soul of what these stories are trying to say and do when you focus so much on the specifics and the logistics of how the fights work. But I understand that power scaling is a big part of comic book fandom and superheroes in general. Part of the experience of being a comic book fan is that everybody has a favorite, that one character that you're just ride or die for and will defend forever. And everybody's probably had the argument at some point about who the strongest superhero actually is, which is why this video is sponsored by Marvel Contest of Champions. Marvel Contest of Champions is a high-fidelity, arcade-style fighting game available for both mobile and PC, where you can collect and battle with over 350 heroes and villains from across the Marvel Universe. The game has been around for more than 11 years and is still getting updated with new content, which is honestly kind of insane. It's a massive game with over 325 million players and a ton of characters to mess around with. The combat has that fast, arcade-style feel, and every champion has their own signature attacks. There's also a full story mode with iconic Marvel locations as the backdrop. You're building your roster, battling through the contest, and working your way through a much bigger Marvel world while putting together your own lineup of champions. And obviously, one of the best parts of this game is just the roster itself. Half the fun is finding your favorites and putting together your team. And honestly, just seeing how many characters are in this thing. Like, they even have this guy called Spider-Man. Whoa, I've never heard of the dude. They got some obscure picks in this one. Use my QR code or the link down below to play Marvel Contest of Champions today, and for a limited time until May 6th, you can claim the Heavy Hitters bundle, which includes 10 champions for free, including Hercules, The Thing, Shang-Chi, and Iron Fist. Thanks to Marvel Contest of Champions for sponsoring this video, and thanks to my patrons and channel members who help make these videos possible for just $1 a month. The main voice cast is amazing, but they didn't need to cast celebrities for all these minor roles. I totally agree with this here. I think that Steven Yeun and J.K. Simmons are doing a phenomenal job. Even someone like Aaron Paul, who before this didn't have a ton of voice acting experience, incredible as Powerplex. Same with Thrag. I actually really like Lee Pace as Thrag. It also works really well for marketing. It's sort of an advertising thing to be like, hey, look at this famous person we got for this character. And so when it comes to like the major like A-lister characters, I don't really have a problem with who they cast. For me, it's mainly a problem when characters that could have been professional voice actors are played by celebrities and like given like 2 lines. John Hamm voiced somebody in season 1. Powerplex's wife is played by Kate Mara for some reason, and the daughter of that archaeologist, that's Ella Purnell. Did that need to be Ella Purnell? Be so for real with me. While it's fun and it's cool to see these like face actors, is that the term for them? I actually don't know what the official term is, be given a chance to shine in like a voice acting role. Voice acting is a very specific job and a very difficult job that there are times when a professional voice actor would probably do the job a little bit better. And I don't want to talk too much about like the budget and how this affects the animation. I will talk about the animation later. I think about characters like Monster Girl and the Maulers and Black Samson. I love Greta Lyle and Carrie Payton and Kevin Michael Richardson. Genuinely, they're like my favorite people in the business, aside from my friend Eric, who is also a voice actor. And I start thinking, if those characters were cast today with the sort of like celebrity focused casting that we see in the new seasons, would they still cast those professional voice actors, or would they just pull in like fucking Childish Gambino or something, you know? It's not to say that the celebrities do a bad job. I actually think the celebrities do a surprisingly good job for how little experience some of them have with voice acting. But it does sort of sometimes feel like, come on, at a certain point, we just cast a regular voice actor, you know? Omni Man should never be redeemed ever. I have conflicting thoughts on this as a take, and I think especially the show makes it very complicated to talk about this, because for those who don't know, in the comic, the fight between Mark and Omni Man is not that bad. It's still bad. It's still pretty bad. But by comparison to how the show does it with like 2,300 people dying, I don't even remember a specific number for the comic, but it's not that many. And so because of that, I've always like been curious how the show is going to go about this sort of like redemption arc and stuff for Nolan. And I like how it kind of created this conversation of like, does he deserve to be forgiven? Does he deserve to be redeemed? And the reason I lay in the middle of it is because I do think that those are two different questions. To me, redemption is more of a personal internal journey. It's a character seeing the mistakes and the failures that they've made in the past, and then making an effort to undo them and make up for them. Whereas forgiveness has more to do with how other characters see that character and whether or not the relationships can fully be healed because of their actions. Because if you ask me, I do think Nolan can be redeemed in that definition. I do think that this character, who his entire life was told one thing, was bred from birth basically to be a warmongering killing machine. And now, after a relatively short time on Earth with people that loved him and cared about him, he started to see the error of his ways and how that life was a mistake. The problem is that realization happened after irrevocable damage that he did, especially in the show. But still, internally, he is going through that journey, and I do think that journey is very interesting. Whereas externally, in terms of relationships and forgiveness, no. Not even a little bit. I think it makes for really great stories and really great interactions between characters that serves as a very interesting change from the comic, while still keeping a lot of the thematic messaging that this journey represents. Because I do think a lot of people are kind of missing the point when it comes to why is Omni Man being redeemed from a thematic level. To me, the redemption of someone like Omni Man, and frankly any character in fiction for that matter, it's a matter of hyperbole. It's this idea that even Nolan, this character who his entire life of thousands and thousands, if not more years, now after finally seeing the error of his ways and the mistakes that he made, is trying to be a better person because of it. I think that that shows that no matter how many mistakes you make in life, no matter what you do wrong, and no matter what lifestyle you've lived before this, you can always change and you can always be a better person. I think that hyperbole and that extremity works really well for this story. It's part of why I love superhero stories. It's taking these very personal and intimate ideas of redemption and relationships, and it's exploding them to these sort of massive cosmic level scales. Whether or not you personally believe that it's like an earned redemption or an earned forgiveness, that's up to you. And frankly, I'm not going to say anybody's right or wrong about that. But to me, that journey and that question, like that I frankly can't really answer, has been my favorite part of the show so far. I really wanted to see more of the Mark variants. I agree, actually. It's funny because I don't really care about multiverse stuff, but I think the concept of having this character who is seemingly the only one in the multiverse who's a good guy have to deal with, you know, dozens of his evil alter egos who each have different backstories and different personalities and different, wildly different worlds that they come from, and have to come to terms with like, fuck, I'm the only one who's a decent guy? Jesus. There's a lot of interesting stuff they could have done with that, because there's also something to be said about maybe the fact that we don't get a ton of answers in these potential like what if universes. We can fill in the blanks ourselves. I really like the one when they're all like sitting around talking, who just goes, I miss William. That's my favorite part of that whole arc. I love that guy. HURM is the worst episode of the show. Overall, a boring episode that feels like filler. I don't think I agree with this, actually. I understand that it feels like filler because, you know, by definition, I guess it is. It's something that didn't exist in the comic and was a completely original story that Kirkman wanted to tell. And while I don't think it's like the best episode of the show, I don't hate it. I think it's pretty fun. I think there's a lot of cool ideas there. Bruce Campbell plays Satan. That's enough of a selling point. I think what it represents for the character of Mark is very interesting. This idea that he is trying so hard to prove that he's not his dad, and then a magical, mystical ritual that was meant to bring his dad to hell accidentally brings him. But even if it was genuine filler, even if there was like zero character progression or anything like that, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I grew up with Smallville, okay? That shit was 80% filler, and it rips. Filler is a very fun way to expand the world and tell stories that wouldn't fit inside of the main plot narrative, you know? And just spend time with these characters in a way that like only TV shows and comic books are able to do. It kind of reminds me of One Piece, where technically you could skip so many arcs of One Piece, but it's the journey that matters. It's following these characters and seeing their adventures and the trials and tribulations and lessons that they learn along the way. That's what One Piece is. That's what the adventure is. That's what the journey is. And I feel similar to Invincible. Invincible is not just punching and fights and conquest shit. Invincible is about a kid who wanted to be a superhero so bad and is now realizing, fuck, I don't want to be a superhero. I hate it. And all the personal problems that come from that. You know, he's very similar to Spider-Man. He is Spider-Man. He's just a Spider-Man ripoff. He's just a Spider-Man, Superman, Nightwing ripoff. That's all he is. He's great. I love him for that. The vast majority of female characters' arcs end up being way too tied to their romantic relationships. I completely agree with this one. One of the things that I've always appreciated about the show has been that the original creative team is going back in and sort of like fixing up a lot of the biggest issues that the comic has. Cause you know, it's from the early 2000s. They were like a couple 20-year-old guys. They look back on a lot of things and they realize, hey, we could have done that better, you know? And I've always appreciated that about the show. And for the most part, they do that pretty well. But the one thing that they've really not improved on has been that aspect of the female characters. Every single character, every single one of them, basically, like Eve and Debbie and even fucking Monster Girl, once they get in a relationship, they are all intrinsically tied to the male counterpart of their relationship. And this definitely feels like the biggest afterthought that is harming the way I see a lot of these characters and harming the way I see a lot of their relationships. Eve is the most wasted character in the entire show, especially after seeing what she can do in the Adam Eve special. What she does in the actual show doesn't compare. I totally agree with this. I do think the concept of Adam Eve, that's a character that is going to be a little bit harder to write. She can do anything. Like she's too overpowered. They've kind of pigeoned themselves into a hole here where you have a character who's very cool. You've created probably one of the coolest female characters of the past 20 years, and you don't know what to do with her. You don't know how to make her interesting, which is why she constantly gets tied back to her relationship with Mark, or she constantly gets tied back to her relationship with other men. I'm a Green Arrow fan. I see this happen to Black Canary all the fucking time. It's something that kind of plagues the comic book industry, which is a very male-dominated industry, and it has for years, and you'd hoped it'd be improved by now, but like we still see a lot of those issues on a systemic and industry-wide level that like, it's a bummer. Invincible's blue suit is way better than his classic suit. I don't think I agree with this. I love the blue suit. The blue suit looks fucking sick. It's such a good evolution on that main design. The problem is that main design is fucking perfect. People will study and work their entire lives to design a character that is even a fraction as iconic as Invincible is in that main design. The colors are incredible. The fact that his whole body is an eye, which also just happens to be the fucking Image Comics logo. And I like the blue and black suit. But at the same time, it kind of didn't mean anything. It didn't have like a thematic purpose to it. It was just kind of like, hey, this is the darker suit. It's also very funny to be reading the book and see how many times Mark gets a new costume for seemingly no reason. And speaking of costumes, Omni Man's costume was white the whole time. I don't know how that was supposed to be blue. I think that this conversation was so funny when this dropped. For those who don't know, I want to say this was like last month or something. Somebody asked Ryan Otley on Twitter if the black and blue suit was supposed to be like thematically relevant as like an inverted version of Omni Man's costume, which makes sense. Omni Man's costume is white and red. Mark doesn't want to be his father, so his new costume is an inversion of white and red, blue and black. Very cool, very thematic, makes sense, right? But then Ryan Otley came in, decided to make history and said, no, that wasn't intentional because Omni Man's costume was always blue and red. And he showed a bunch of images from the comic. And at first I was like, what the hell are you talking about? That is such a pale blue. And a bunch of people went fucking crazy at him for this. Like people were color picking other parts of the scene that were supposed to be white and comparing it to Omni Man's suit and realizing that they were two different colors and stuff. But the thing that was the nail in the coffin for me, at least, was he showed a lot of old merchandise for the comic, like mini mates and like action figures from before the show. And yeah, that guy's fucking blue. It was the dress all over again. It was very funny. Gender swapping Tech Jacket was unnecessary. Listen, I'm gonna be honest. Do you really give a shit? Do you really give a shit about Tech Jacket? I like Tech Jacket. Tech Jacket's a pretty cool character. You don't give a shit about Tech Jacket. And it goes back to what I was talking about this book is from the early 2000s. And I appreciate that the creative team is doing their best, at least, to kind of fix up some of those representation issues and just the fact that, you know, every fucking character is a guy. A lot of people kept bringing up the beard panel of like, but how are you going to tell this joke about Tech Jacket growing a beard if Tech Jacket's a girl? Who cares? This was such a non-issue because Tech Jacket's like really not a big part of the comic at all in the first place. And I think it's very interesting that there was a lot of hubbub about Tech Jacket getting gender swapped. but nobody gave two shits about Shrinking Ray getting gender swapped. Because I forgot about Shrinking Ray. I forgot that that was a man in the comics. I'm gonna be totally real. Show Amber is terrible. The comic version was much better. Okay, now I know this is like rage bait or some shit. Genuinely, Show Amber is so much more interesting in literally every possible way. In the show, Amber feels like a genuine person. She has her own feelings and has her own emotions and has her own storyline and backstory and like and motivations and everything. And that clashes with Mark sometimes. It clashed with Mark at the end of season 1, and I actually really liked that conflict that they had about him not telling her that he was invincible and her knowing and her being still upset that he didn't tell her. Because I'm a sucker for the secret identity drama. I feel like we don't really get that enough. And it's a bummer because Amber in the later seasons felt like she was sort of toned down and like her edges were sort of rounded off to kind of appease the people who had a problem with her in season 1. But even with that sort of sanded down version of the character, she is leagues more interesting than she is in the comics. Like the comic version of Amber is literally like a nothing burger of a character. Not even a burger. Like she's a nothing French fry. The Invincible fan base is too immature for a lot of its themes. Kind of agree with you here. Granted, I don't think this applies to everybody, you know, not all Invincible fans, but I do think that there's a large subsect of the online community for a show that is tackling a lot of complicated and mature ideas. They clearly don't seem to be capable of like actually having a conversation about it. And we're seeing that right now with characters like Eve and her gaining weight and her having an abortion, because the appeal of Invincible to me is that the story is essentially Spider-Man, or you know, Spider-Man and Superman kind of fused together, dealing with personal and thematic problems that are realistically too mature for a Marvel or DC comic, you know? And it makes me very concerned, again, no spoilers here, the future of the comic. It covers a lot of serious and mature and very uncomfortable dark topics that I don't think you can erase from the story. They're hugely important aspects, not just because of plot reasons, but also for representation of a lot of these complicated, serious ideas that don't really get represented in media. And I know the conversation around that is gonna be so frustrating and so difficult, and it's just so annoying because it already is for things that frankly shouldn't be. The Earth stuff is more interesting than the space stuff. I actually agree with you here. I like the space stuff. I like the Viltrumite War. I love Alan. Alan's a great character, but I think it's just the fact that like on Earth we have more people. On Earth we have more characters that we know, like Debbie and Eve and, you know, Monster Girl and Robot and the Guardians and Mr. Sea Salt over here. And also like the fun ones like Boss Baby. I love Boss Baby. I love Brit. Brit's actually a really fun, cool character. Basically, he's the actual Invincible character. He doesn't take any damage or feel pain or anything, but he has the strength of just a regular guy, and so it makes the stories really interesting. He's really cool. I like Brit a lot. Once I figured out what his deal was, he was very cool. The show peaked at season 1. Now it's just hype moments and aura. I agree, sort of. I don't necessarily think that the show like peaked or anything, but I definitely think that so far season 1 has easily been the best one, specifically because season 1 actually felt like a genuine season of television. It had an overarching plot of the mystery of why Nolan killed the Guardians. It had investigations and like a thematic message throughout the whole season that built up to that one final showdown between Mark and Nolan. And then the ending of that fight hits on such an emotional level. And I don't think any season since has had that same feeling and that same structure. As for it being all hype moments and aura, I don't know if I really agree with that. I still think that there is an interesting thematic story going on. I think the problem is actually a lot of people got invested in the show because of the hype moments and aura from season 3 with like the Conquest fight and the Mark variant, that a lot of people started thinking that the show was only big fights and gore and stuff like that. The animation isn't as bad as everyone makes it out to be. This is the big conversation that everybody's kind of talking about with Invincible right now. And I'm of two minds about it. I don't want to say I agree or disagree, not to be that guy, but I kind of fall right in the middle on this. Because on one hand, the animation's not great. The animation is deeply lacking, not just compared to something like Jujutsu Kaisen, that's not a fair comparison, but even compared to other Western animated shows, even compared to like the first season. This is an animated show. Animation is a visual medium, and animation is an art form, and clearly the animation in Invincible is so poor and lacking so much that even general audiences who wouldn't notice this kind of thing, they are noticing it and they are kind of making fun of it because of that. I do think it is worth criticizing a major corporation that is Amazon for what is their biggest show on their platform having lackluster animation in an animated show, especially when it feels like so much budget is going to celebrities and famous voice actors. But at the same time, I do understand that it's more complicated than that. I know that it's not necessarily just like pump more money into this and it will be better. There are a lot of more complicated factors that go into this sort of thing. And I also understand that the wait between season 1 and season 2 was so long. Their priority now is to get seasons out yearly. The animation's the animation. I can live with lackluster animation, but for me the biggest problem is that there's only apparently 4 compositors in the entire show. For those who don't know, compositing is doing stuff like putting characters on backgrounds and lighting effects and shadows. And it's kind of like the final pass of turning something that's like a rough animation into something that's finalized and deliverable. And so for them to only have 4 compositors per episode for episodes that are pretty long, that's where I feel like the biggest improvement could actually come from. And we've seen a lot of fan edits of the compositing, and it does a lot for giving just a little bit more depth and personality and like polish. I don't need to see a ton of impact frames and bloom and all this crazy shit. But just like a little bit of shading and rim lighting would really go a long way. I understand they're trying to replicate Cory Walker's style, where Cory Walker's style is a lot flatter and like uses these sort of bright saturated colors, but it works with Cory Walker because he's Cory Walker, because he's very good at it. There's a very common saying in sort of like freelance work that I think applies here very well. A project can either be done cheap, it can be done good, or it can be done fast. And you can only pick two of those. If you want something done cheap and you want it done fast, it's not going to be very good. And I kind of think that that's the case when it comes to Invincible's animation. And I don't think this is the problem of any of the animators. You know, it's clearly a budget problem. It's clearly an Amazon problem. These are giant corporations. Of course they can pay double their compositors. Of course they can add a couple more animators to the team. It's frustrating to like have this conversation all the time, because I also think a lot of people don't really know what any of this means. They don't know what bad animation is. And at the same time, whenever you try to criticize the show, whenever you want to say that something is lacking in some fundamental way, you get met with people who basically say that you should just be grateful and not criticize the show at all. And I think that's frustrating too, you know? It's perfectly serviceable. Like I can watch the show and there will be moments that are actually very impressive. I can kind of live with mid animation and mid visuals because we have the comic and I've read the comic and the comic visuals are great. I think the problems more so come from why isn't the biggest show on Amazon getting more funding from the giant massive corporation that is Amazon, you know? Okay, that was a lot of controversial opinions from other people, but you know what? Let me put my hat in the ring. Let me say my controversial opinion about Invincible. My hot take is that the title card bit is very fun, but they're doing it wrong. I think that the whole thing of having a joke, I think it's very funny. I like that kind of personality and identity for the show. But when they do the title card, it's very clear that the actor speaking is not following through with the word invincible. And I'm gonna give a couple examples here. So hear me out, okay? In order to beat this bad guy, I'm gonna have to be and that's kind of how it feels in the show. It feels like it's just sort of being teed up to be the title card instead of like interrupting an actual line that someone would be saying, you know? Versus what I think they should be doing. In order to beat this bad guy, I'm gonna have to be I feel like I'm going crazy here. I'm the only person I've ever seen mention this. But let me know down below what your hot take or controversial opinion is about Invincible and what other characters you want to see me do a hot takes video about next. If you like this video, be sure to the like button and subscribe. Thanks again to Marvel Contest of Champions for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to use my link or scan the QR code to download the game and get 10 free champions with the Heavy Hitters bundle until May 6th. Special thanks to Peachy Boyo and Mars Out of Stars 2 for joining the spectacular tier of my Patreon and channel members. If you want to support the channel for just $1 a month, you get your name in the credits and access to all my videos early. And for $3, you get access to exclusive videos once a month. I got a very fun thing coming soon over there about the new Lego Batman game. I got a chance to play that early for a bit, so make sure you don't miss out on that. This has been TroyBoy17 coming at you live. Be responsible, and I'll see you around.